Hello everyone, my name's Cliff and welcome back to my channel. This is Cliff's Dark Gems. Today I'm going to be counting down my top 10 horror reads for 2023 so far. Stay tuned. Okay everyone, these are all 4 5-star reads for me. I just found something very interesting when I was trying to narrow this down and trying to decide, because I've had a lot of 4-star reads in particular, is that sometimes your ratings change over time, or how you think about a book can change. Because some of the books that I read at the beginning of the year that I gave 4 stars to, I decided that actually I should have given them 5 because they really resonated with me, they've stayed with me. So yeah, this is quite a tricky one. Okay, a further point is that I have reviewed all of these books, so if you want something in a little bit more detail than perhaps I'm going to give today, it might be a good idea to go back into my channel, my backlog, and you can find some of the reviews from the wrap-ups, and I've done a couple of full reviews as well, but that's only if you're obviously interested. But that might make more sense because today I'm just going to talk about the books, why I love them, and I'm not going to go into so much of the plot and the detail and stuff like that. Okay everyone, so let's get to it. First off we have Derek Landy, Skullduggery Pleasant. Now this book was actually the first YA book I've read in a long time, and I was just so blown away. It was just such a pleasant surprise. And I'm just thinking it's quite interesting. I suppose a lot of people might see YA and just kind of brush it off and say, no, I'm not interested in reading YA. But I actually really enjoyed it, and I think this is the kind of book that would be great for adults and younger people. This book is about a young 12-year-old Stephanie, who is an awesome character in her own right, but she has a relationship, she forms a kind of team bond with this magical skeleton detective. And the two of these characters are just awesome together. There's a lot of snappy dialogue, there's a lot of humour, and when her uncle gets murdered, they have to solve the mystery, and they end up having this incredible magical adventure together while they have to battle the forces of evil. Now, as I said, this is fast paced, it's an exciting read, and it's really excellent, and even though it's YA, really anyone can enjoy it. There are a lot of other very interesting characters in this novel as well, besides these two, and really they are very well developed, very likable. The villains are particularly nasty, and it's a lot of action and some fun violence and just an awesome adventure. Definitely not a horror, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. It is part of a much longer series, and I'd love to get my hands on part 2 soon. That is Skullduggery Pleasant. Okay, next we have a seriously underrated gem from a seriously underrated author, and I have actually reviewed both. This is in my list of top favourite authors of all time, and that is Cold Moon Over Babylon by Michael McDowell. This is a murder mystery of supernatural revenge. Basically you've got this little town, small town. Michael McDowell's brilliant at that as a Southern Gothic writer, and he's very good with the characters, painting the characters, the setting, and the relationships and the interactions between the characters, and it's just an awesome novel. Now, it is a very slow burn as you kind of sink in and get immersed into the town and into the characters and the stories, and then it builds up tension beautifully, and by the end you just got this awesome bloody ending. And yeah, that is Michael McDowell, Cold Moon Over Babylon. Okay everyone, next up in 8th position we have what Goodreads calls literary classic with a blood-sucking twist. And that's exactly what this is. And it is brilliant. And don't worry, I've said in a previous video that if you really enjoyed the original classic, you can still enjoy this one. You just need to go into it with a bit of an open mind. Now Jane is an awesome heroine, and she grows up under very, very difficult circumstances. I don't want to talk too much about the plot, I don't want to give anything away, but she grows up with a family of vampires. Now that is in opposition to Jane Eyre, where she grows up and also has a horrible time with her aunt and her cousins. Now this is great because then she goes into this boarding school. She refines her slayer techniques as she becomes a better fighter. Not going to say anything more than that. And look, she ends up in this book fighting all sorts of creatures, vampires, zombies and all sorts. And she ends up falling in love. If you know the original story, she falls in love with her master eventually when she grows up, called Rochester. But he's holding a secret. And the whole thing is, can this love survive this secret? It's just a wonderful novel. It's easy to read, even though it's written in a little bit of a classic form. And Jane herself is probably my favourite character that I've read about this whole year. And that is Jane Slayer by Charlotte Bronte. Okay, next up we have in 7th position J.R. Correll, More Than a Vampire. Now I gave this 5 stars, and it fully deserves those 5 stars. Just wish that in the beginning maybe he had told me a little bit more about Dracula, because at the beginning it's Dracula going around the world and starting up these 4 clans. And in these 4 clans, fast forward a little bit, you get this one character, I think his name is Simon, yes, and he's our hero in the story. Now he is responsible for hunting down rogue vampires. That's right, vampires that have run wild, because it's a very controlled society. And what happens with Simon is that he falls in love with a female vampire called Lena. And basically she is from another clan. So it is a forbidden love and not supposed to go there. A little bit like Romeo and Juliet, I suppose. At first glance this might seem like a horror novel, but it's a lot more than that. Yes, it's got vampires, but it's just a very fast-paced adventure, fun read. And yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed myself. It was just so exciting. And there's myths and there's monsters and there's magic. And it was just all in all, absolutely wild ride. A lot of violence, a lot of gore as well. But it's the first time I've heard of this author, and I'm going to definitely carry on with the rest of these novels. One of the things I absolutely loved about this novel, besides its pace and its adventure and its action, was the places where it took place, and especially Africa. And seriously, his descriptions of some of the magic and the monsters and the myths, the mythology, is just pretty damn awesome. And the ending is breathtaking. It was exciting, violent, and just full of it. It's just, you need to read this book for yourself. This is an underrated author, and not many people have actually read this book or read the author, so I would go for it. That is J.R. Correll, More Than a Vampire. Okay, in 6th position we have Brian Keene, The Rising. Also on my Kindle, like the last one, so I don't have a hard copy here. But really, this book was so horrifying. And basically, the world has gone to hell, the dead walk the earth, and there's a man, a father, trying to look for his son. And he basically gets together with other survivors, and they have to cross the country to find the son. The one thing I really enjoyed about this particular novel is how absolutely original the zombies were. You're not going to find zombies like this in films like Night of the Living Dead or any movies, but what he's done with these zombies, he makes them super intelligent. The actual source of the zombies is something completely different, and the zombies are super hateful, and they basically can take the form of birds, animals, anything probably bigger than a mouse, and they can drive cars, they can shoot guns. The only thing that limits them is their decomposing flesh. But basically, even if the arm is separate, it'll still come for you. So it is absolutely horrifying, and it is a lot of fun at the same time. And just be warned, this book is very graphic, it is gory, it is horrible, it is bloody. But as I said, it's a hell of a lot of fun. Another thing that these survivors have to basically put up with is the other human survivors that are the military, and they're very awful, and so they've got to go through all sorts of obstacles in order to get to the sun. And As I said, a wonderful cast of characters. The survivors that travel with this dad, with his father. It's just really, really wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed this novel. So that is The Rising by Brian Keene. Okay, next up we have another underrated gem from a seriously underrated author. And in this particular book I did a full review on one of my previous channels. That is Mark Morris' Toady, in 5th position, yes. Now Toady is about these four boys, and they call themselves the Horror Club, and they end up having a seance and calling up this terrible evil, and that starts to threaten the town. And they have to actually fight this evil and battle this evil. Otherwise the town is going to be pretty much doomed. Now, what I enjoyed most about this particular novel is the nature of the evil. Unlike anything I've read before or seen before in a movie. And it's just so original and so creative. And the world building in this is absolutely fabulous. It does remind me a little bit about It, but hell, in some ways it's a little bit better. It's definitely a 5-star read. The characters are very well drawn out. You really feel for these kids. And as I said, the world building, the fantasy world building at the end of the novel is pretty damn mind-blowing. And it builds towards an incredibly thrilling, gory at times climax. And there are some very, very dark moments in this book towards the end. But yeah, I kind of wish that they had added a little bit more maybe of the world that it takes you to at the end. I'm not going to give anything away. But this is just an absolutely fabulous book. And I highly recommend it for anyone. And I'm dying to get my hands on another Mark Morris book. That is Toady. Okay everyone, now we're getting into territory where it was very, very difficult to decide. In fact, it was very difficult for this whole list to decide what goes where. And there were so many other 4-star novels that I've read that I actually could have put on this list. But now we're getting to books that I really, really enjoyed. And in 4th position we have Brian Lumley, Necroscope. Now this is the first part of a long series. This book took me by surprise. I was very surprised that I haven't actually read this author before, because it's very well known and it's just freaking awesome. And it's set in the Cold War, and it's about a spy, this Russian spy. It's actually not Russian, and he's called Dragosani, and he's a necroscope, and he basically sucks the life out of the dead to get their secrets. So he's used as a spy, as a Russian spy. Now, he's the antagonist. The protagonist is a guy called Harry. I think it's Harry Kun. But he's basically a necroscope. And what he does is he can hear dead people. And they tell him their secrets. So he doesn't have to do anything, they just talk to him. And they want to talk. And they want to fill him with knowledge. And these two, the antagonist and the protagonist, are basically on the course basically clash at some stage. The book also has a 1,000-year-old vampire that's trapped. It has all these other assortment of crazy characters, and it's just so much fun. And some brilliant horror, brilliant kind of body horror type stuff in there as well. The opening scene I remember being really, really horrific, but this is just highly recommended. That is Brian Lumley, Necroscope. In 3rd position we have a book that I read at the beginning of the year, and for some bizarre reason I gave it 4 stars instead of 5 stars. And really this book has stayed with me, and it's just absolutely beautiful storytelling, and that is Stephen King, 11/22/63. Now, people call this a horror novel. I'm really not so sure about that. There are some little bits of horror in there somewhere, but this is not a horror novel. This is a time-traveling love story, and it's just a beautifully written, well-written story that is really epic in my opinion. Now it's about Jake Epping, who's an English teacher, and he finds a means to go back in time, and his plan is to basically stop the assassination of JFK. And so he goes back, and he basically, the first part of the book, the first half of the book is quite a slow burn. There is just beautifully describes the long gone era of the 50s and the 60s. the easier time of living. No cell phones, no nothing. And it's just so beautifully described by Stephen King. The characters themselves are also just so well drawn out. And he takes his time. As I say, it's a slow burn, first half of the novel. There are some incredibly vicious scenes, but it's just a beautiful novel. The second half of the novel really builds up pace and builds up tension. Okay, there's a lot of politics that I wasn't that interested in, and I think that led to my decision to give it a 4-star. But the more I think about it, this is just a beautiful, beautiful book, and it deserves 5 stars. Never mind what I said on Goodreads. Now, the second half of the book, the last third of the book, is basically the countdown, and it's thrilling, it's terrifying, it's exciting, and yeah, do yourselves a favor. Before your lifetime runs out, read this book. Whether you think you like Stephen King or not, this is just a glorious book. That is 11/22/63. In second position, and it might be a bit of surprise to some of you, but this is a book that just touched me and basically moved me and blew me utterly away. And that was Joyland by Stephen King, the only other entry on this list. But this is just an absolutely beautiful book. And it's obviously, as you can see, it's set in a carnival, Joyland, and you know me and carnivals, I've got a thing about them. And you really get to know the Carney folk and the Carney way of living. It's just a spectacular book. It's a coming-of-age story, it's a mystery murder thriller, and there is some horror, and there's some terror, particularly at the end. But it's also a very warm, moving story about this boy, Devon. And Stephen King does teenagers and younger people so well. And he's a student, and he basically works in this carnival over the summer, but he's broken up with his girlfriend, so there's heartache as well. And some of the themes in this novel is just love and loss and friendship and grief, and also growing old. There's a sense of nostalgia. This book absolutely touched me. I think I was in tears at the end. It is moving and it's powerful. So I'm not going to tell you anything more about the story, but I know you might think Stephen King, a certain stigma with just horror. The last 2 books I mentioned, this one in 11/22/63, give them a try. It's worth your while. That is Joyland by Stephen King. Okay, now we're going to move back to all-out horror. And this was a long, long book. I'm going to talk about that later. But this is most definitely my number 1 read so far this year. And that is The Terror by Dan Simmons. Now, this very, very long historical novel was based on a true story, the Franklin expedition. And really, it is a terrifying, harrowing adventure on the ice. And it's about basically these 2 ships that get locked in the ice during this expedition, and about what happens to the men on these 2 ships. Now, I know that there's a lot of historical detail, and that might be a problem for some, because there's very, very detailed history that he brings in with the novel. But I found it absolutely fascinating, and if anything, it actually made me immerse myself, allowed me to immerse myself more in the experience of reading this novel. The characterization of this novel is also exceptional, and the shifting perspectives of the different crew members, and the way we see different points of view, it really helps you get into the story, in my opinion. And the introduction of a supernatural element, I know some people don't like that. I thought it was very, very interesting. And the way that it adds to the human horror and this creature that's stalking them and killing them. Just an overwhelmingly powerful novel. And yes, it's very, very long, but I had absolutely no problem devouring this, all 900 pages of it. And as my wife will probably say, I stayed up that morning until 4 o'clock in the morning to finish this novel. I was a little bit tired the next day, but it was well worth it. That is Dan Simmons' The Terror, on number 1 position. Okay everyone, there we have it, my top 10 reads so far in 2023. Now it'll be very interesting to see if anyone knocks off The Terror from number 1 position, and to see how much my list changes by the end of the year. Let me know what you think. Have you read any of these? And if you enjoyed this content, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Take care of yourselves, keep those pages turning, and cheers.